The air in the mine grew thick as the shard of Eon pulsed with dangerous energy, its power echoing through the darkened tunnels. Jared, Callum, and Lyra, two warriors forged by battle, raced toward their final destination, only to find themselves face to face with a terrifying new enemy. The Nixians, creatures of pure energy, have arrived to claim the shard, and they won't stop until it's theirs. With time running out and the shard's power threatening to consume them all, Jared and Lyra must fight not only for their lives but for the survival of the galaxy itself. Will they escape the Nixian forces, or will they fall victim to the artifact's deadly allure? The battle for the shard is about to begin. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. The mining outpost of Korma Prime was exactly the kind of place Jared Callum liked to avoid. A barren, desolate world in the outer rim, Korma Prime had a reputation for being as grim as the rocky surface that covered it. The constant hum of machinery echoed through the cold industrial buildings, and the air always seemed thick with dust and the scent of metal. Jared, a soldier from the human colony on Epsilon 5, had seen his fair share of war zones, but this place, this outpost, felt different. After 3 weeks of continuous combat missions, his worn, battered armor was now covered in scars. Each mark, a reminder of the countless battles he'd fought and survived. The weight of his armor felt heavier than usual, as if it carried the weight of every fight he'd ever been in. But when Jared ducked under the low entrance to the local bar, he couldn't help but feel a brief sense of relief. Even this grim place with its shabby, dimly lit corners and fragile-looking alien patrons felt like a sanctuary compared to the hell he'd just left behind. Inside, the scene was exactly as expected. A handful of alien miners, their fragile bodies slouched at the tables, their skin translucent and shimmering in the low light. The eerie quiet of the bar was broken only by the occasional clink of a glass or the muttered conversations of beings who clearly weren't used to the chaos of war. The entire place seemed like a reflection of the world outside, fragile, peaceful, and brittle. As he made his way to the bar, Jared noticed the way the room went silent. It wasn't unusual for people to fall quiet when a human entered a room. Humans were an uncommon sight on Korma Prime, and their reputation preceded them. Jared wasn't sure if it was the intimidating bulk of his combat armor, the scars from past battles, or the simple fact that humans had earned a certain level of respect across the galaxy, but one thing was for sure. He had their attention. But it wasn't the patrons who caught his eye. It was her. In the corner of the room, sitting at the bar, was a figure that immediately commanded his attention. Lyra. The way she sat there, with a calm, almost predatory air about her, felt like a warning to anyone who dared to approach. Her violet skin glimmered under the dim lights, and the long, dark hair that cascaded down her back seemed to have a life of its own. She wore battle-worn armor, not unlike his own, but it had a distinct design, a reflection of the brutal world she came from. Lyra's eyes, however, were the most striking feature. They glowed with an inner fire that was both mesmerizing and dangerous. Jared's instinct told him she was a warrior, one who had seen things far worse than anything he'd encountered. The room seemed to hold its breath as the two warriors locked eyes. Jared could feel the temperature in the room rise a few degrees, not from any physical change, but from the tension that now filled the air. The local bartender, a creature with too many arms and far too many eyes, slithered away, as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Jared and Lyra stood locked in a silent challenge, as if their very presence had called forth a primal instinct in each other. Then, without warning, Lyra stood from her seat with a fluid grace that made it clear she was no stranger to combat. Her movements were calculated, purposeful, like someone who had spent a lifetime learning the art of war. Jared felt the familiar weight of his own combat readiness kick in, his hand resting on the hilt of the plasma knife at his belt. He met her gaze with a cocky grin, but inside something primal stirred. It had been too long since he'd encountered a warrior like this, someone who could match him, blow for blow. "You're in my way," she said, her voice smooth and dangerously playful, like a cat toying with its prey. "Am I?" Jared replied, matching her grin with his own, his fingers twitching around the handle of his weapon. Without warning, Lyra's fist shot out, A powerful punch aimed directly at his jaw. Jared didn't hesitate. He caught her fist with ease, the force of the blow sending a shockwave through the bar. A few nearby chairs shattered under the pressure. Jared smirked. "Nice hook," he said, his voice full of amusement. "But your form needs work." The challenge was accepted. In an instant, the bar exploded into chaos. Lyra and Jared were no longer just two strangers exchanging words. They were warriors locked in a dance of battle, each testing the other's limits. The patrons, too terrified to stay, scrambled for cover. The fragile furniture that decorated the bar was no match for the power of the two combatants. With each punch, each kick, the very foundation of the building seemed to shake. It wasn't just a fight. It was a test of raw, unbridled strength. Lyra moved with an elegance that belied her power, her body a perfect blend of grace and force. She was lightning quick, a predator in every sense of the word. But Jared wasn't easily impressed. He was a soldier, born and bred for combat, and he met each of her moves with one of his own, countering with sheer strength and precision. They fought, each blow sending shockwaves through the room, each strike a conversation of power and skill. The air between them crackled with an intensity that only warriors could understand. Jared had been in countless battles, but this was different. He had never met an opponent quite like Lyra. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a force of nature. The fight ended as suddenly as it had begun. Both warriors, bloodied and bruised, stood facing each other, their bodies heaving with exhaustion. But there was no animosity in their eyes. Instead, there was respect, a new understanding. Without a word, Jared grinned and wiped the blood from his lip. "Not bad for an alien," he said, his voice rough with exertion. Lyra's laugh echoed through the bar, a sound like steel striking steel. "You're not so bad yourself," she replied. "Care for a drink?" Jared, still catching his breath, nodded. "Only if it's something strong enough to kill lesser species." With that, they walked to the bar, the tension between them now replaced with a mutual understanding. They weren't just warriors anymore. They were equals, and so began the unexpected alliance between the two apex predators. After their intense battle, the atmosphere in the bar had shifted. What was once tense and charged with hostility now carried a sense of camaraderie. Lyra and Jared Callum found themselves seated at a corner table, their drinks in hand, the shattered remains of the local furniture forgotten. The few remaining patrons kept their distance, clearly unsure of how to react to the sudden shift from violent confrontation to casual conversation, but none dared to interrupt the two warriors. Jared swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the burn of Terran whiskey making his throat catch with every sip. The familiar comforting sting was a stark contrast to the electric tension that had simmered between him and Lyra only moments before. He hadn't expected to meet anyone like her on this forsaken planet. But here she was, an apex predator, just like him, shaped by a world far more hostile than the one he knew. "So tell me," Jared said, his voice gruff from the fight, "what brings an elite warrior like you to this rock?" Lyra's violet eyes gleamed under the dim light as she leaned forward, her glowing gaze focused intently on Jared. Her armor creaked softly as she shifted, and Jared couldn't help but notice how she moved, like someone who was constantly aware of their surroundings, always ready for the next battle. "I'm here because of an artifact," she said quietly, her tone turning serious. "The Shard of Eon." Jared raised an eyebrow. He had heard the rumors about the Shard, the ancient artifact said to hold unimaginable power. But what he didn't know was that the Shard had drawn the attention of beings far worse than the Nixians or any other galactic menace. It was a relic of a forgotten age, capable of changing the fate of entire worlds. "I've heard of it," Jared replied, his interest piqued. "But I thought it was just a myth, something the miners whisper about to pass the time." Lyra shook her head, a slight smile on her lips. "It's no myth, Jared. The Shard is real, and it's here, on Korma Prime." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as she studied him. "You see, the Shard is not just a weapon or an artifact. It's a key. one that can unlock ancient technologies and reshape entire planets. If the wrong hands get their hold of it, there's no telling what they could do. Jared felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen what happened when dangerous artifacts fell into the wrong hands. The war on Epsilon 5 had started because of a similar relic, a weapon of mass destruction that had been unleashed on an unsuspecting world. The destruction had been unimaginable. "So, what are you doing here?" Jared asked, his voice quieter now. "You said you're here to protect it. But who exactly are you protecting it from?" "From the Nixians," Lyra responded, her eyes narrowing as she spoke the name of the enemy. "They're an ancient race, ruthless and merciless. They've been searching for the shard for centuries, and if they get their hands on it, they will turn every planet they touch into a battlefield, a war zone. They will use the shard's power to spread destruction across the galaxy." Jared felt the weight of her words settle heavily on his chest. The Nixians were a species unlike any other. They were creatures of pure energy, their very presence warping the fabric of reality around them. They could bend time and space, and their technology was as advanced as it was terrifying. "You're not the only one after it," Lyra continued, her voice now tinged with urgency. "There are others, ruthless mercenaries, treasure hunters, and even entire armies. All of them want the shard for themselves. Some want to use it as a weapon. Others simply want the power it can offer. But none of them understand its true purpose. The shard is a catalyst. It reacts to those forged in the harshest environments. It doesn't just amplify strength, it amplifies survival instincts. It can make you stronger than you ever thought possible." Jared's mind raced. He had fought, in countless wars, faced enemies more dangerous than most could imagine. But something about the shard felt different. If it could enhance survival instincts, if it could make him stronger, then it was no wonder so many were willing to kill for it. "So, what's the plan?" Jared asked, leaning forward, his military instincts kicking in. "You said the Nixians were after it. How do we stop them?" Lyra smiled, but it wasn't the same playful grin from their earlier fight. This was a smile of someone who had seen the darkness of the universe and had learned to live with it. "We don't just stop them. We take the shard before they can, but getting it won't be easy. The shard is deep in the heart of Korma Prime, hidden in a mine that's been abandoned for decades. And even if we find it, we'll have to face the Nixians, and everything else that's guarding it." Jared could sense the determination in Lyra's voice. She wasn't just doing this for the shard. She was doing this because she knew the consequences of failure. She understood that the fate of countless worlds rested on their shoulders, and if they didn't stop the Nixians, the entire galaxy could be doomed. "I'm in," Jared said, his voice steady. "If there's a chance we can stop the Nixians and keep the shard out of their hands, then I'm with you." Lyra nodded, her eyes glowing brighter as she stood from her seat. "Good, because we'll need all the strength we can get. The path ahead will be dangerous. But if we survive this, we'll have more than just a shard. We'll have the power to change the galaxy." With that, the two warriors stood side by side, ready to face whatever awaited them. They knew the journey ahead would test them in ways they couldn't predict. But one thing was certain: they weren't alone. Together they would fight for the survival of the galaxy. As they left the bar, the faint sound of a ship's engines echoed in the distance. The hunt for the shard was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The cold winds of Korma Prime howled as Lyra and Jared made their way toward the outpost's mining complex. The air was thick with dust, and the sky above them was a dull gray expanse that stretched endlessly, as if the very heavens themselves had abandoned the planet. The journey to the heart of the mine would take several hours on foot, but the urgency of their mission left no room for hesitation. As they walked, the ground beneath their boots crunched with each step, the dry, brittle surface of Korma Prime, a stark reminder of the planet's harshness. Lyra's violet skin shimmered faintly in the dim light of the distant twin suns, her armor a perfect blend of function and grace. Her every movement was calculated, efficient, as though she had become one with the unforgiving landscape. Jared, on the other hand, stood out like a stark contrast. His human form, encased in battered combat armor, moved with the confidence of someone who had spent years on the battlefield. Though his exterior was covered in dents and scratches, there was an undeniable strength in his posture. His eyes, ever watchful, scanned the desolate terrain, knowing that danger could emerge from any direction. "I don't suppose you've mentioned the full extent of what's waiting for us down there, have you?" Jared asked, his voice breaking the silence as they trudged through the barren wasteland. Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "The mine is more than just a place where resources are extracted, Jared. It's a fortress in its own right. It was built to withstand not only the planet's violent storms, but also any hostile force that might try to invade. But it's been abandoned for years. Only a few remnants of the old security systems remain intact. And you think the Nixians will just stroll in and let us take the shard?" Jared's voice carried a note of skepticism. "They will," Lyra said, her tone matter-of-fact. "They'll underestimate us, just as everyone else does. They're coming in blind, thinking they can outmatch a pair of survivors. But they don't know what we're capable of. Korma Prime has forged me into something they could never understand." Jared could see the fire in her eyes, the same determination that had burned through their fight at the bar. There was no doubt in his mind now that she wasn't just another warrior. She was a force, shaped by years of survival in a world far harsher than anything he had ever faced. "All right then," Jared said, his voice growing more confident. "Let's make sure they never see us coming." Hours later, as the sun began to set over Korma Prime, the two warriors reached the outskirts of the mining complex. The rusted remnants of old equipment littered the landscape, their metallic surfaces reflecting the dying light of the twin suns. The mine was a massive structure, dug deep into the heart of the planet. Its jagged metallic framework seemed to grow out of the rock like some twisted monument to the past. Lyra led the way, her footsteps silent against the rough ground. As they neared the entrance, Jared felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something deeply unsettling about the mine, something that felt ancient, almost cursed. The shadows seemed to cling to the edges of the mine's darkened entrance, and the faint hum of old machinery filled the air, though it was difficult to tell whether it was a relic of the past or some hidden force still active beneath the surface. "Can feel it," Lyra said quietly, as she crouched beside a nearby rock outcrop, her eyes narrowing as she peered into the mine's entrance. "The shard is close. I can sense its power, but it's guarded. The Nixians won't be the only ones waiting for us." Jared nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his plasma blade. "Who else are we dealing with?" "Other hunters," Lyra replied. "Mercenaries, treasure seekers, those who think they can claim the shard for themselves. They've been hiding in the depths of the mine, watching for someone foolish enough to come, looking for it." With a silent nod, Lyra signaled to Jared. The two of them moved forward, their steps in perfect sync. They entered the mine cautiously, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. The inside of the complex was a labyrinth of steel corridors and rusted machinery, all eerily quiet, except for the distant sound of something scraping against metal. The further they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as though the mine itself was alive, its tunnels breathing with a cold metallic life. Jared's senses were on high alert, his mind racing as he kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak in the walls felt like it could be the sound of something, or someone, waiting to strike. "Stay close," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. The Nixians could be anywhere. Jared's grip tightened on his weapon as they moved deeper into the bowels of the mine. The faint glow of Lyra's violet eyes illuminated the path ahead, casting strange shadows on the walls. It was unnerving how quiet it was. A world built for survival, now reduced to nothing more than a hushed tomb, waiting to reveal its secrets. They reached a large chamber, its ceiling towering high above them, supported by massive rusted beams. The walls were lined with ancient machinery, long abandoned but still ominously intact. And at the center of the room, surrounded by dust and decay, was the shard. It glowed with a faint, pulsating light, its surface rippling like liquid glass. The power it emitted filled the room, an almost tangible force that made the hairs on the back of Jared's neck stand on end. Lyra took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the shard. "It's more beautiful than I remember," she murmured, her voice filled with awe. But her expression soon hardened. "And more dangerous." Jared stepped forward, his hand hovering near his weapon. "Let's grab it and get out of here before someone else shows up." Just as Lyra reached out to touch the shard, a sudden deafening roar echoed through the mine. Jared's eyes snapped to the entrance, and he saw figures emerging from the darkness. Mercenaries armed with plasma rifles and energy shields. "Looks like we have company," Jared said grimly. Lyra didn't flinch. Her hand remained steady as she grasped the shard, its energy coursing through her. "Get ready," she said, her voice calm and deadly. The battle for the shard had begun, and Jared and Lyra were ready to prove that no one could take it from them. The clash was immediate. As soon as the mercenaries burst into the chamber, weapons raised, the atmosphere seemed to crackle with tension. Jared instinctively dropped into a combat stance, his hand snapping to the plasma rifle slung across his back. Lyra, standing beside him, was already in motion, her violet skin shimmering with the subtle energy of the shard she held. Her eyes glowed brighter than ever, a fiery intensity radiating from her as if the very essence of the artifact had seeped into her soul. Jared's eyes scanned the room. There were at least a dozen mercenaries, all heavily armed and ready for a fight. They moved with practiced precision, their feet making barely a sound on the old metal floor. They had been waiting for this moment, just as Lyra had suspected. But the difference between them and the two warriors in the chamber was simple. Lyra and Jared had nothing left to lose. The mercenary leader, a tall figure with a jagged scar running across his face, stepped forward, a cruel grin spreading across his features. "You're too late," he said, his voice dripping with confidence. "The shard is ours now. You can either walk away and live or stay and die. Your choice." Lyra's lips curled into a smirk, her eyes narrowing. "We didn't come here to negotiate, and we sure as hell didn't come here to lose." Before Jared could react, Lyra launched herself forward, moving with the deadly grace of a seasoned warrior. The shard pulsed in her hands as she weaved through the mercenaries, her violet skin almost a blur of motion. She was a whirlwind, her strikes landing with the precision of someone who had fought and survived the harshest worlds. Jared wasn't far behind. His combat training kicked in as he raised his rifle, the sound of plasma fire filling the room. Each shot was calculated, designed to disable rather than kill. Jared wasn't here to play with these mercenaries. He was here to make sure they never threatened the shard or Lyra again. The mercenaries, though well-trained, were caught off guard. Lyra's strength and speed left them struggling to keep up, while Jared's deadly accuracy made them second-guess every move. But the mercenaries had numbers on their side. They retaliated with ferocity, their plasma rifles roaring to life as they returned fire, the beams of light flashing through the chamber. Lyra ducked under a plasma shot, her hand darting out to strike an opponent in the chest. The force of her blow sent the mercenary crashing backward, his body slamming into a pile of old machinery. She spun around, her foot landing squarely in the chest of another attacker, sending him flying into the air, his weapon clattering to the ground. But as Jared took cover behind a column, he could see the tide beginning to turn. The mercenaries had regrouped, their numbers overwhelming the two warriors. Jared's mind raced. He needed to do something that would give them the upper hand before they were completely surrounded. "Lyra," Jared shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to move now." Lyra's eyes flickered toward him for just a moment, and with that single look, they both knew what needed to be done. With the shard still glowing fiercely in her hands, Lyra leaped into the air, her feet barely touching the ground before she spun around, releasing a wave of energy so intense that the ground beneath them trembled. The mercenaries were blasted backward, their bodies thrown against the walls with a sickening thud. Jared wasted no time. He took his chance, sprinting toward the shard, his rifle now slung over his back. As he reached Lyra, he grabbed her arm, and pulled her toward an exit leading deeper into the mine. There was no time to waste. The longer they stayed in this chamber, the more chances the mercenaries had of regrouping. And they both knew the Nixians would be coming soon. "Move," Jared ordered as they bolted into the darkened corridors of the mine. The sound of explosions, shouts, and gunfire echoed behind them as they ran. The path ahead was a maze of sharp turns, tight passages, and old, rusted equipment. The air was thick with dust and the stench of burning metal. Lyra's glowing eyes led the way, and Jared's every sense was tuned to the sounds of pursuit, his heart pounding in his chest. The further they went, the more the atmosphere in the mine seemed to shift. It wasn't just the presence of the shard. It was as if the very walls of the mine were reacting to it, amplifying its energy. The temperature in the narrow corridors began to rise, the air becoming thick and stifling. Jared could feel the shard's power intensifying with every step they took, a constant pulsating energy that seemed to be alive. "We're getting closer," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. She was calm, but Jared could sense the urgency in her tone. "But we're not the only ones who want it. The Nixians will be here any minute." Jared gritted his teeth. "We need to secure it before they do, and we need to get out of here." They reached a large chamber at the heart of the mine. The walls were lined with glowing crystals, their light faint but steady. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it, the shard lay, resting in its ancient cradle. Lyra approached it with reverence, her fingers brushing against the cool surface. The shard pulsed once more as if welcoming her touch. She could feel its power surge through her, and for a moment, everything around her seemed to fade. The battle, the mercenaries, the danger, it all disappeared. But then, a sharp noise shattered the silence. From the shadows emerged the Nixian forces. Their bodies were strange and ethereal, formed of shifting energy and crackling with raw power. They were the ultimate predators, beings of pure energy, and they knew no mercy. "Hand it over, warrior," one of the Nixians said, its voice a disembodied whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Lyra and Jared exchanged a look, both warriors now ready for what was about to come. "You want it?" Lyra asked, her voice icy. "You'll have to take it." And with that, the final battle for the shard began.